Hello and welcome to the TGH College Hardwood podcast. I'm Joe. With me is Greg, as always, here to talk about the last week of college basketball, preview the next week. We're getting into the thick of the conference play. Greg, how are you doing?
Man, I tell you what, conference play, I'm just looking over our sheet of stuff we got to talk about. We got a lot to talk about, and I think that's a good change from those couple of weeks, around Christmas and New Year's where we came in here every week and said, we got nothing to really talk about. It's a light week. So let's just hop into it, Joe.
Yeah, a lot of weeks I feel like we've maybe spent a lot of time talking about one or two subjects. We're going to have to talk a lot about a lot of subjects this week, so we'll get into it right away. We start off with a recap of last week. We had Colorado State beating Greg's New Mexico Lobos in a tough game here. Colorado State wins 76-68. We know Isaiah Stevens is a very good player. We know he always shows up, 18 points in this game. So it's going to be tough in the Mountain West. I know you mentioned it's 2-3 bid league. We'll see if that can hold up if they don't beat up on each other enough in conference play. So what were your thoughts on this one, Greg?
Mr. Rothstein still thinks this is a 5 bid league. So not that listen, this with this some of this analysis, some of the stuff he says, we saw a tweet today about Joe brought it up in a chat we have about him saying Fifth Third Arena, which is UC's home court, it was a top venue or whatever, and Joe's like, I don't know if it's top couple hundred, but whatever. We like John for breaking news analysis. He maybe gets a little hyperbole ish. I don't know if that's a word, but I just made it a word. No, I mean, I here's the thing about this league, and we can talk about this now. We can talk about this later, but I have Utah State as one of the teams I wanted to talk about in here. I mentioned New Mexico in the preseason. Colorado State's been kind of a surprise. I know there's somebody else I'm forgetting. San Diego State is still in the Mountain West. This looks like a packed conference. I'd say 3 is a shoe in at this point. I can't imagine that. I guess the league could break a certain way where they cannibalize each other a little bit, but have to think 3 is a shoe in. We could be looking at 4, but I think 5 might be a stretch. I just think some of these players or some of these teams that are winning lots of games right now might turn out to be pretenders. We'll just have to see. This game in particular, it's a good win for Colorado State. A game that we probably wouldn't have. It was a little bit of a light early week. It just was something that popped up because those were 2 1-loss teams. So I believe that is going to be. I think it's a Q2. I was getting ready to pull up. Colorado State currently 19th in the net, so that's definitely a win you like to have under your belt. I'm currently pulling up their so that is a Q2 win. So Colorado State, they've got a couple of good wins. They've got that Creighton win. In context, maybe it looks a little bit interesting, although Creighton's still sitting at 14th in the net. They did lose. This was on our docket to talk about. They did lose later in the week to Utah State, who, after turning over their entire roster, only has 1 loss. They're putting a little bit of a good resume together for probably I would have to think a single digit seed. Maybe something in the 4 to 7 range. We'll get figure that out more as conference play goes on. Joe, what do you think if we could talk about this game in particular, or you can take it and spin it as what does this conference look like? To me, if you want to look at the landscape, it looks like this is a better conference than the American. Just thinking obviously the A10 is probably only going to be maybe a 1, maybe a 2 bid league. This is probably I would have to say that 6th or 7th league out there, right behind the power conferences right now, and it's in part just because we got a couple of surprises that weren't supposed to be good this year, like Utah State. So what are you thinking?
Yeah, I think it's a multiple bid league as far as how many they get in. I'm not sure it's 5. I'm not sure it's quite 3. I'm not sure it's 4. I think they'll definitely get 2 in, but it's always tough for these conferences like the American, like you mentioned, the A10, to get all these teams in. A lot of time there's a battle of attrition going down into conference play. The good news for them is they do have about 6 teams right now that I think are at least in consideration when you put in Utah State, San Diego State, Nevada, Boise State, Colorado State. we'll just have to see who keeps up. I mean, you mentioned Colorado State had the tough loss to Utah State later in the week. You know, if you're from the Mountain West and you end up having 7, 8 losses total, even though right now 5 of the teams in the conference have 2 losses or less, does that get you in? Historically, probably not, but we'll have to see. Some of the teams have some good wins as well, and the only team I think I'm 100% confident, or I guess there's 2 teams I'm 100% confident will at least be in good position to put themselves in the tournament, are San Diego State and Colorado State. Everyone else, even with 14-1 Utah State and 14-1 Nevada, I feel like they still have a lot of work to do. So we'll see how it goes throughout the rest of the way. There's a lot of talented players. I do think Colorado State and San Diego State are the best teams, and they might end up being, the ones who have 4 or 5 losses by the end of this, rather than the 7, 8, 9, 10, which could leave you on the outside looking in. All right, so the next one up, we are going to talk about Wednesday. We had Providence and Seton Hall. Seton Hall is proving to be a much tougher team than many thought initially. The big news out of this game, though, Greg, Bryce Hopkins gets injured. He is out for the season. That puts a damper on things. Providence was 11-3 after this game. It's just not looking like maybe this is a team that will have enough to get to the tournament after being ranked, and after heading into conference play, they only had a loss to Oklahoma on the road. Seton Hall being good and pushing their way towards bubble talk, as they were not really on the bubble about a week or 2 ago, is a big story as well. But when you have a player like Bryce Hopkins, a lot of All-American teams and everything like that, that's the huge news here. I don't think they have enough to really push through and get to the tournament at this point.
Yeah, it's almost like these 2 teams, not necessarily in this game in particular, but just in general, they almost kind of flip-flopped. How we were looking at them. Providence, they got the Devin Carter, they got Bryce Hopkins. Seton Hall, just kind of an afterthought. Well, now Seton Hall's got that win over UConn. We can get to this later, but they went and won at home against Marquette this weekend. Obviously, they won this game against Providence. And Providence, on the other hand, going to be without, possibly maybe an All-American candidate, or at least an All Big East candidate for the rest of the season. Really unfortunate. So I did not see this coming from Seton Hall. Nothing told me that this team was going to be competing in the Big East. I don't know if you want to say the bigger story in this game is Seton Hall's emergence or Bryce Hopkins' injury. For me, just with the way the season's been going, the bigger story is Bryce Hopkins of those 2 kind of things to talk about, because this Providence team in Kim English's first year was really looking to start coming together. And I think I even said last week, was looking at possibly being a top 3 team in the Big East, which is it's nothing to shake a stick at the way the Big East is looking this year. But I'm with you, man. That's the kind of injury that that probably takes you, from maybe a 4, 5, 6 seed to possibly out of the tournament. Maybe they have enough goodwill on there, but of course we know that the selection committee is going to take this stuff into account. I mean, and if they're, looking at going to Dayton and playing in the first 4, and there's someone else that's completely healthy, I can't imagine they'd pick them, that they'd pick Providence. So.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Providence right now has the better resume if you look at things in total. 56th on the net, 2-2 quad 1, 2-2 quad 2, and no losses other than that. But when you talk about the last couple of games, it's really not going to be that good. And then Bryce Hopkins down the stretch. Now, Seton Hall, you're right. I think Bryce Hopkins is the bigger story. Seton Hall putting themselves in good position now, but they're at 73rd in the net. It's really hard for a team that's ranked below, I would say, 50 in the net to make the tournament. It does happen, but all the way down to 73, they have a lot of work to do. They have 2 quad 2 losses, 2 quad 1 losses, 1 quad 3 loss. So good by Shaheen Holloway to get this team where they are. It's been a massive rebuilding job, and yes, it goes faster these years, but he's going to have to keep on winning some games to be tough in the Big East. As we mentioned, it's hard to win on the road, and it's tough for some of these teams. Like this game, getting this road win is huge for Seton Hall. The other Wednesday game we're going to talk about from last week, we have Miami and Clemson. Now, Miami won this game 95-82. I watched a lot of this game, Greg. They were down at the half, but they came back and scored 60 second half points. Now, this is impressive because I think that this is obviously a guard-oriented team. Wooga Poplar was out for this game, too. So are we seeing a little bit of the Brad Brownell, like the fading of Brad Brownell starting to happen in ACC play? Is Miami that good even without Poplar? There's a lot of questions to be answered here, Greg.
Yeah, and it adds to the context when Clemson went on this weekend, and again, this is getting a little ahead of ourselves, but we got these points that intertwine. Go and lose a very ugly 65-55 game to Carolina later in the week. And that's not a bad loss, but when you look at the week, I mean, I think you were hoping, all right, if we got to play Carolina later in the week and we're trying to prove ourselves to be contenders, this Miami game it's one we got to have. You know, it's I know it was on the road, but it was at Miami, correct?
Correct.
Okay, yeah, that's one of my head. I had flip flopped on the. I put a little outline together for Joe, and I had the teams flip flop by accident. But yeah, I mean, this is one you want to have when you know you got a pretty big game coming in later in the week. I'm still not, selling my Clemson stock. I think we kind of knew that they weren't going to be, a top 15 team. I still think this is probably a tournament team. So. It's just they're starting to show that, they're not going to be an elite team in the ACC, which I think you and I probably both already knew. But I mean, if you start to look at the resume, it is a little light. The Bama win, which again, the net loves Bama for some reason, still sitting at a single digit. They've got win over TCU, win over Pitt, wins over South Carolina, Boise State. I mean, they've got no bad losses, but like. These were two pretty good opportunities to have some good quality Q1 wins, and they didn't get either of them. Not the worst thing in the world, but still sitting at 23 in the net. So again, if you're Clemson, you would have much rather split these games. You probably were more likely to win the Miami game, but at the end of the day, there's more on the schedule. There's going to be a couple more opportunities. It's the ACC. It's not the strongest conference, but there's definitely going to be a few more times for them to get some quality wins. Just would have been nice for them to take at least one of these two.
With you on that one. This game did feature only 8 bench points. All 8 were by Clemson, so a lot of depth issues to be answered here, especially with Miami having Poplar out for this one. I'll mention something real quick too. We talk about Gonzaga being a team that doesn't have the depth, and we'll talk about them more later. Probably my final thought, but Miami, they can't afford Norchad Omier to get hurt. He's only like 6'5", but he's their big guy. He's kind of strong and rebounds well. When he has to go to the bench in foul trouble, obviously it happened against Kentucky. They are not the greatest team. They almost like this game, like times where he was on the floor, kind of got away from them. They have a bunch of guards, and that's really great. And even when Poplar comes back, that's I don't want to say like most valuable player. I guess I do want to say that because if that guy goes down, just in the same way that like if Ryan Nembhard goes down for Gonzaga, the teams are just totally different teams. So they're maybe not like if you have Zach Edey go down for Purdue, like they still are a very good team. I don't know if you can say that about Miami or Gonzaga. So just something to watch out for down the stretch. I do think that says a lot about Omier. And how he's played. I know I had him in, I think, preseason All-American third team or something like that. He's played pretty well, so hopefully they can keep that going because the guards are nice, but getting to the tournament time when teams can exploit your lack of size, that could be tough. Next one up, we have the Arizona Wildcats beating Colorado. Now, Greg, you picked Colorado. You got some flack for some of the friends for picking them. We didn't know who was all going to be playing for Colorado with some injuries going on. But this is Arizona, I think, really starting to rebound back to their form. I think they had a rough last week, the last couple weeks, but like this to me wasn't like surprising in the sense of like Colorado had guys out. Arizona was just getting back to where they were 2 weeks ago, where we were talking about them being one of the top 3 teams in the country, where their guards are just playing phenomenal.
Joe, I watched this game and I forced myself to watch the entirety of the game because I picked Colorado. I just, thought. It sounded like they were trending towards Tristan da Silva and Cody Williams, or at least one of those two being back. Neither of them played in this game. I don't care that neither of them played in this game. 97-50. You still got KJ Simpson. You still got Eddie Lampkin. There's still pieces on this team. I wouldn't. When I found out, okay, neither of those guys are playing. All right, they're probably going to lose this game. That stinks. That score, coupled with the fact that they go to Arizona State and they lose that game a couple days later with Tristan da Silva in the lineup. I don't believe Cody Williams played in that game. I don't think he's healthy just yet. But their stock took a big hit for me this week. And this is a team that in the preseason, I looked at Joe does a preseason top 25, and I said, Joe, you might want to think it, including this Colorado team. And you said, I don't know. I think there may be I can't remember exactly what you said. Maybe you said top 30, top 40 team. But you were like, no, I don't think I'll have them on the back end of my preseason top 25. And I was higher on this team than you were. And that's one of the reasons I picked them to, regardless of their injury status, pick them to win this game. I just thought maybe they're starting to fulfill their potential. KJ Simpson's still good, but their stock between the score at Arizona and the loss to Arizona State, not a good week for them. They're definitely taking a knock on my book. I mean, that's just not a good week.
Arizona State did have a big week. We're not going to talk about them too much, but they did beat Utah, and then they beat Colorado. So I think they might be getting close to that tier of, we're going to start considering them for the tournament. I did have Colorado in, full transparency. They were 25 on my top 25. USC was another one that I think you had tried to get me to rank higher. I had them 22. Just weird. Like, it's just a weird Pac-12 year where I don't know what's going to happen. I do know Arizona is the best team in this conference, hands down. I would say there's some other, like Oregon. I know we had mentioned in the text, as well. But Arizona's the best. They have all three guards playing well. Even when Omar Ballo doesn't play well, they don't need him to because they have these guards playing pretty well. So I'm excited for Arizona. I'll see what they do the rest of the way here. Let's keep moving, Greg. We have some more to get to here. Let's go to UConn Butler on Friday. UConn's just good, and I don't think Butler's very good, honestly. I know they got some hype earlier in their season. They're 10-5 after this game. I don't see it. They kept them close, and that's cool, but there's no moral victories in the Big East.
Yeah, they kept them close, but we've seen UConn do that with a couple of teams this year. So, I did say when we were talking last week, hey, maybe this game will be surprising, and they'll keep the game close. Butler still is, I mean, again, winning record at the moment, but not really any big wins. I think their best win is Texas Tech. They also have a win over Boise State, but basically every Q1 opportunity, or actually all of the Q1 opportunities they've had, they've lost. So still haven't proved anything to us. It is nice that they kept it, close, but like you said, this is competing for conference play, and it's not going to do anything to the resume that it was a close game. I just think this might be a team that in Big East play, they might end up just picking off a couple of teams, or I feel like Marquette is vulnerable. We've already seen it. This just might be one of those things where in a couple of weeks we look at one of those results and we're like, well, that seems weird, and it's like, well, they're a middle of the pack, or maybe top of the bottom third, or however you want to say. They're probably in the I don't know, 7, 8, 9 range in the Big East, but this conference seems pretty deep. They still might have the capability to just get a little bit of an upset win here or there, but other than that, I think I'm with you. They don't seem like a tournament team. Good for Thad for putting a winning team together, but probably not sneaking in unless they really string some wins together.
I will say I'm very happy with them because they are one of the teams where, like, we're trying to figure out this puzzle of college basketball, and then you have Kentucky lose to UNC Wilmington, or FAU lose to Bryant, and then Charlotte, and then all that. But, like, they're 0-5 against Quad 1. They've won every other game. Like, they're easy to figure out. They won't beat the good teams. They can beat any of the kind of okay teams they go up against, especially when they've been at home for a lot of non-conference play. Also on Friday, we had Purdue beating Illinois 83-78. Now, this was maybe not like a true a box score kind of thing here. We have Purdue winning by 5, but really they were in pretty good control of this game most of the way throughout. They were winning 47-32 at halftime. We know Terrence Shannon didn't play. Domask for Illinois really stepped up late in the game to kind of make it close too. But for me, watching this game, Greg, I was just and every time I do, it's the same thing for Purdue. I'm impressed with their depth. They, if one guy has a bad game, they'll throw other guys at the problem, and they'll be able to fix it. So Trey Kaufman-Renn had a big game. I know in Maui, I think Fletcher Lawyer and Zach Edey had big games, and Braden Smith did not have a good game. So that's what the depth will do. They just got to make sure to keep the chemistry rolling and to make sure that, like, when it does come to tournament time and the rotation shrinks, the guys are still ready to play, because that's what could get them in the tournament, like kind of like happened last year.
Yeah, I did watch all of this game, and it did feel like for about 35 minutes, Purdue was in complete control, and then Illinois just kind of they kind of made the score close at the end. But even when it was time to foul, and I think there was one point where it was like a 5 point or 6 point game. Obviously, the score finished. I think it was 83-78 or something. But there was one point where it got a little dicey. Maybe they got it as close as 4, but even then, there was, I think, like 30 seconds left, and you knew like the math was there, but probably not. The one thing you and I have not talked about this. I don't know if you've done any reading into this Terrence Shannon stuff, but thanks to Suits, I know what a TRO is. So it sounds like we might be working towards Terrence Shannon being back on this team. And we're already seeing what Illinois can do, regardless of the fact that Purdue controlled this game. I was still impressed with the way Illinois played. I mean, playing, a couple of games without inarguably an All-American candidate, if not a first or second team, he's at least a candidate. And now they might get him back. We'll have to see on that. So it's everything I'm reading, and we don't need to get into specifics. I don't know what you've read or whatnot, but it sounds like there's going to be a restraining order put in. And I'm even reading today that it sounds like not only is he maintaining his innocence, but he might not have even been involved in the incident. We don't want to, speculate or whatever. The only thing we'll talk about is the basketball, and it sounds like he might be back. That makes Illinois really dangerous because you're seeing what this team can do without him. They've got some guys. One of the things I really liked, I saw a lot of they play. Zach Edey played a lot of drop coverage where he just kind of sat in the paint. But they had a couple of plays where either Coleman Hawkins, who's their small five, Dane Danger is their other big guy, but they would, when Edey's guarding Hawkins, he can shoot the three. So he was taking those shots. You don't want him taking 15 of those shots a game, but they were taking advantage of that. And then there were a couple other plays where I saw they were trying to get the ball, to the high post, and then they would have someone back cut on the baseline. So Edey steps up to try and take away that kind of floater shot. They would have someone back cut to get an easy layup. So they were trying to be creative with it. I just feel like sometimes when you watch these teams play Edey, it's like they're just like, all right, we're just going to jump shoot the whole game. We're not going inside. It's nice to see at least an attempt because you're probably not going to, you might win a couple of games, but you're not going to consistently win games just saying, yeah, we're not going to take anything inside of 15 feet. We're staying out here and taking jump shots. Again, you're probably going to have a game or two where you're on, but I did like that. I saw, Brad Underwood try to get creative with it. And it did, of course they lost the game, but they had some success. And obviously the shooting towards the end was what actually got them back into the game and made the score as close as it was. But it was a good effort. We've talked about the key to going up against Edey before, and I feel like sometimes these games get stale where it's just the other team just decides, all right, we're not going for layups at all. But it was nice to see that from them.
Yeah, I think we found out if you can make Edey guard, whether with ball handlers or a stretch five, that could really be a big thing. But you also, if you do that, you have to make sure your defense is good too. So that's something that will be explored later on, even if Purdue goes farther in the tournament, because they do handle some 16 seeds or 15 seeds or 14 seeds or whoever they've lost to in the past. If they play a good team who has a guy who can be a stretch five or someone who can really pressure Zach Edey to play out near the perimeter on defense, it opens up everything for an offense. So Illinois, too, I do think they have a lot of talent, Greg. I think Coleman Hawkins is one that maybe has caught some flack in years past, but in this system, the last couple of years, I think he's grown, and if they do get Terrence Shannon back, they can win the Big Ten. They can possibly go to a Final Four. I think we mentioned it before. It's tough to know what will happen with the legal situation. This is a temporary restraining order thing. Could happen. It could not happen. There's, like you said, a lot to be figured out. I could see the team still be holding him out just to be safe because it's just one of those situations you never want to be on the wrong side of. But there's a lot to be decided with this Illinois team, and we'll just kind of keep tracking them as the season goes along. Moving on to Saturday now, Greg. We had North Carolina beating Clemson. This was a game of, Baycott did not have a lot of points. He only had 14 points, but he had 16 rebounds. And when you're going against a team like PJ Hall, a team like Clemson with PJ Hall, that means a lot for this game. Very impressed. I mean, RJ Davis is still, I think, the best player in North Carolina this year by far. And I think that their guards are stepping up. We don't have, like, the guy stepping up in the same sense of maybe what we thought would be the case early in the year. They're not getting a lot of, I would say, quality play from Elliot Cadeau. We thought he'd be like a superstar. He had 4 points in this game, but they have enough to get things done. And I think a lot of it is just because they have two guys you can count on in RJ Davis and Armando Baycott.
Yeah, we already kind of touched on the Clemson side of things, so we won't get too much into that. I do like that we see Carolina win an ugly game. This is a team that's used to scoring in the 70s, 80s, even 90s a couple of times this year. They put up 100 on Tennessee. I do like that they won differently. You win a 65-55 game. That tells me you're flexible. You know how to win in different situations. They're putting a little bit of a resume together. That's an away game, so that's probably going to stick. I would have to think Clemson's going to stay top 75, just with what they've already built and what's left on the schedule. So they've got that win. They've got the Oklahoma win. They've got the Tennessee win. Their only losses are UConn, Kentucky, and that one confusing loss is Nova, but Net still loves Nova at 33. So we'll just have to see, some of these numbers, man, you're going to have to explain to me. I don't know if somebody's paying the NCAA. I think the ones that come to mind are I don't have FAUs in front of me, but I think last week when we talked, they were like 15th. Nova's sitting at 33. I guess they got a couple of good wins in that tournament, which yours truly picked them to win. But, good for Carolina. I can't remember. Did they have another game this week? Just talking in general about them, I think they had Pitt earlier in the week. Mm-hmm. Not a game that was on our radar. Actually is a Q1 win at the moment. Good for them. Don't know if that'll stay Q1 as Pitt goes through the ACC schedule. So this team is looking like it's firing on all cylinders. Again, they didn't put up 90 points and they still won the game. They held a team to 55. They actually held Clemson to 55 and Pitt to 57 this week. So pretty good week for them to see that defense can play too.
Yeah, if the net teaches us anything, like you mentioned, it's that you can blow out bad teams and it'll help you. So that's a recipe for success. You can take losses, but if you blow out bad teams, Florida Atlantic, you mentioned, they are 26th in the net. So they're still ranked pretty high despite some of their losses, which are, not the greatest. Let's move on to Seton Hall and Marquette. We talked about Seton Hall really making a push to be towards that bubble. Still have to figure some things out with the net, but they get the win against 7th-ranked Marquette in this game. I think, we mentioned, Greg, last week, and I think the week before too, winning in the Big East on the road is going to be tough, so I'm not ready to panic all the way with Marquette, but 2 conference losses already does make you kind of start scratching your head a little bit. What also makes you start scratching your head, Tyler Kolek, 5 points in 36 minutes. 6 assists are nice, but if you have a guy who's that good and he only gets 5 points, it's not going to end well for you, especially with 6 assists. If he has like 12 assists and he's dishing it out to everyone, and Cam Jones has 20 points, and Iguodaro has 20 points, which he did have, and then Joplin has 20 points, cool, but they needed him to be more aggressive and to score more, and he was 1 of 6 from the field.
Yeah, Joe, I actually looked while we were podcasting last week because we brought up Marquette for some reason. I believe I picked Kolek to be player of the year. I think I just went for continuity there, and I picked Marquette to win the Big East. I happen to have my notebook in front of me. I couldn't tell you what you picked. I think you may have picked Marquette, but if I remember correctly, I don't think you picked Kolek to win Big East Player of the Year. I can't remember who you picked. You might have picked Hopkins, maybe. Yeah. But so this team was a team that we just kind of almost gave them the FAU treatment. Hey, you're bringing everybody back. Essentially everybody, of course, was Omax Prosper ended up going to the NBA draft, but basically everybody else. So all in all, I mean, their losses are to Purdue, a Wisconsin team we think is pretty good, Providence when they were at full strength, and now Seton Hall that seems to be riding a little bit of a wave here. Nothing confusing here. No quad 2, no quad 3, no quad 4 losses. Nothing strange. They did have a little bit of a tight one that I turned on earlier in the year against St. Thomas. That would have been an interesting one. That was a bye game at home, I think in middle of December. But doesn't seem like they're going to be the juggernaut we maybe thought they were. But at the same time, I mean, we know what happened to UConn last year when they started Big East play. So maybe this is just how the Big East works. You're just not going to have somebody finish the conference season with 2 or 3 losses. Whoever wins that Big East is probably going to have, I would think, 5, maybe even 6 losses, which, it just depends on how it works out. But it feels like this conference, there's just, it almost is like the Big 12. There's just no nights off.
Yeah, what's crazy to me, Greg, is last year I was very surprised when Kolek won Big East Player of the Year. I'll say it. I don't think he should have won it. I think they gave it to the best player on the best team when it came down to it. But at the end of the day, like the whole Big East season, we were talking about Bryce Hopkins versus Sule Boom from Xavier about winning the award, and then all of a sudden, like Marquette wins and everyone votes for him. But he's averaging like 1.5 more points per game. I think he's down like an assist per game, but he's averaging more rebounds. So it's not like he's having an awful season or he's playing that bad. He's had games where it makes you scratch your head. Like, is this the guy that won the Big East Player of the Year? But I don't even know if he should have last year. Like, a guy scored 12.9 points and had 7.5 assists, and the assists are nice, but that's just something to me. I don't know. I think he's a good player. I would love to have him as point guard of 95% of college basketball teams. But, I don't know if, like, that's really changing my opinion. I think you're right. They haven't lost any majorly bad games. I think the Big East is going to be an absolute war this year, especially at the top with teams like Marquette and UConn and what I thought would be Providence, and maybe Creighton's able to figure some things out as well. So I'm not panicking about it. I'm not panicking about Tower Kolek. I still think he'll be a very good player. He may not be the Big East Player of the Year this year, which is fine, I think. We had James Madison get their first loss of the season, Greg. I had mentioned I thought they'd be the last team to lose in college basketball. Houston currently is still undefeated, so they may be wrong on that one. Southern Miss beats them 81-71. We have a former big-time college basketball player on Southern Miss who, has played at least a little bit better. He's had Southern Miss playing a little bit better over the last couple of weeks because he didn't start the season playing. But they get the win here. They beat Georgia State before that. They're now 8-7. It's not the team you want to lose to if you're James Madison, but you're going to lose at some point. It's just going to happen in college basketball. So, I don't want to read too much into it at this point.
That's fine. We don't want to read too much into it, but yes, they're undefeated, but like 75% of their schedule it's in quad 4. Their only good win is Michigan State, and now they have this loss, this Q3 loss to Southern Miss. The net loves Michigan State. The media loves Michigan State. Is there any reason to maybe be worried about this team that maybe they're fraudulent?
Fraudulent in that I don't think they were ever going to get an at-large bid.
So that's that's where I would be going with that. I think some people were saying, this, and it would be weird to see a team ranked in the top 25 not get an at-large bid, but like, so they're sitting at 55 in the net. That's back end for, I know we've seen some teams as high as like 30. Like, wasn't Rutgers the year they were like the first team out? Weren't they like 33rd in the net? But there's also been teams in the net as high as like, I don't know, 52, 53, 54 that have been at larges. So I'm with you. I think it's the point where they probably, like, there's a chance they could finish the season with like 2 or 3 losses. And who did we do this with a couple years ago? We do this with, like, maybe it was a Belmont team or a Lipscomb team or something like that. It was one of those schools, and it's just like, they're undefeated, through half the season, and now we've got 1 loss, and then you really start to take a fine-tooth comb to the resume, and like, outside of Michigan State, man, like, there's not a lot there. And I know it's the Sun Belt, so there'll probably be, I don't think there's any, I'm not looking, actually I can pull up their schedule right now. I don't believe they'll have any Q1 opportunities. I would have to think most of their schedule will be quad 2, quad 3. I'm just pulling it up right now. But I mean, it kind of stinks for a team to, go this long without losing, and now it's all of a sudden like they lose once, and it's like eek, you know. But this is not. You're right. I'm with you. You're right. This is not the game you want to lose. I know Andre Curbelo, he had a triple. It wasn't the triple double wasn't in this game. Andre Curbelo had a triple double this week, but I believe it was in Southern Miss's other game.
Mm-hmm.
I do have the schedule pulled up right now. Their best opponent is Appalachian State, and I believe that is a home game. So, man, like that's 91 in the net. There's no Q1 opportunities. There's maybe like 1 or 2 Q2 opportunities. So for them to get an at-large, Joe, what do you think? They probably can't take another loss to be an at-large team. If they take 1 or even 2 more losses, they probably have to win the conference tournament. And then again, that just stinks for a team that has been sitting in the top 25. But when you look at it, it was really only because of that Michigan State win.
I don't think they're an at-large team no matter what at this point. I didn't think they were going to be. I mean,
that's fair.
They went undefeated, that's fine. But this is a Sun Belt conference that routinely gets 16 and 15 seeds. That's where the level of play is for college basketball. Florida Atlantic was a 9 seed last year after going 30-3, and they were in a much better conference than the Sun Belt. So I don't think it was on the table. It was good to get the 1 win. I do think they're a way better Sun Belt team than we thought, and I would take them against maybe some tournament teams this year based on what we saw. But I don't think it was ever realistic. I think people maybe just thought it because they were ranked. And it's like, yeah, maybe they should be ranked because they actually beat someone in the first week, and not everyone does that. Not everyone wins games against, teams we thought would be Final Four teams at the start of the year. So I don't think they're fraudulent. I just think they're a very good Sun Belt team, and they could definitely finish the season 30-3 like Florida Atlantic did last year. But if they finish the season 30-3, they're going to be like a 13 seed or a 12 seed at best, I think, even so. All right, let's get to a controversial game, Greg. We have Kansas and TCU. Kansas wins this one 83-81. And all I'll say about it is we had questionable officiating down the stretch. I would say TCU probably should have won this game, but I'll give credit where credit is due. Hunter Dickinson had a fantastic game. He had 30 points and 11 rebounds to really help them out. A lot of the issues we've seen with Kansas are still present, but they are good enough to beat teams, I think, like TCU in the Big 12. They will compete at the top of the Big 12 by the end of the year for sure. Them in Houston as well.
Yeah, there was a couple of things. There was a flagrant foul that was questionable at best, committed by what was a former Kansas player, actually. I think Ernest Uday might have even been a top 100 recruit. I don't have the recruiting rankings in front of me, but I feel like I remember him being not high, but maybe in the 60s or 70s or something. So, and then there was everybody on Twitter's arguing about the game-winning shot that Hunter Dickinson hit. Did he travel? Didn't he travel? TCU they were sitting pretty, and then it's one of those things where just a few things didn't break their way, and all of a sudden they're down, they lost. Big opportunity for TCU. They are sitting at 37th in the net. They don't get it done. It's unfortunate for them because, again, this was a game I don't want to say they had in hand, but if you're worried about them, they're going to have plenty more opportunities. Kansas, I mean, I don't really have much to say about them. You just, they are what they thought we were. I can't remember who. That's the Cardinals coach that said that, isn't it? Now I'm forgetting who said that.
Yeah, Dennis Green.
Yeah. So I mean, it's the same. I wanted to say Denny Crum, and I was like, that's not right. That's not even the right sport. But they just continue to win these games. They've had a couple of close games here and there. Their only loss is to Marquette, so they're sitting pretty. But it's the same thing we've kind of said with this team, Joe. There's always that, yeah, but one injury, one this, one that. They needed a nice call to even win this game. So, and you want to say it's that blue blood home court advantage. It is only a quad 2 win for them. I would imagine it might stay that. Maybe I don't think it'll drop to a quad 3. We'll have to see, but I don't think anything about Kansas in my mind changed. I haven't known what to think of TCU. I know they got a couple of pieces in. They got Jameer Nelson's son on the team, and a couple other pieces. I I don't know if you have an opinion of them. I still don't know what to think of them. I don't know if they're a tournament team. They haven't done much yet, so I think they're just like everybody else in the Big 12. Going through the Big 12 gauntlet will tell us what they are.
Yeah, I'm not high on TCU. I think they've not really shown us anything so far that can obviously change as time goes on. But it's a tough Big 12, and we're seeing other teams emerge from the Big 12, and that maybe we didn't expect at the start. Like Cincinnati just beat BYU. So there's definitely things I would say Jamie Dixon can do to maybe be competitive, but I don't even know how far up the Big 12 standings you can really get. Let's go to the Florida Atlantic Charlotte game, Greg. Florida Atlantic suffers another loss. It is to Charlotte. It is a quad 2 loss, but it just adds to the fact that they were in trouble like we talked about last week with 2 quad 4 losses. They can't afford too many quad 2 or quad 3 losses the rest of the way if they want an at large. And what makes matters worse is Memphis still wins some games. I know they had a close one on Sunday, but they're winning games, and that could be really tough for them to win the conference tournament.
Yeah, they got those wins over Arizona and Texas A&M, which I guess are keeping them afloat. They're still sitting at 26th in that, like you already pointed out, 2 quad 4 losses. Arguably, well, not arguably. You had the stay. Was it no one else in the top whatever has even won? I know you said it earlier. I don't know if we were talking or texting. But you had some stat about how few quad 4 losses the rest of the teams have. But yeah, I mean, I think last week when I talked about this team, I was like, well, I think maybe they'll have some opportunities in the American. And when I started taking a deeper look at it, I just pulled up their schedule now. Outside of Memphis, I think it's worse than I thought. SMU is okay in the net at the moment. So basically, they've got SMU and Memphis are their, for those would be away games. Those would be quad 1. They'd actually be quad 2 home games at the moment. North Texas, and then that's really it. So I think last week when we talked about this, I said, yeah, Joe, I think I'd be more worried about, Gonzaga than FAU, but I have to do an about face on that and say after seeing this result and seeing what they have left on their schedule. At least Gonzaga's won and again, I know FAU's won a couple of good games, but FAU's really got to kick it into gear if they want, I don't know. Did you say you were worried about that? You weren't necessarily worried about them making the tournament, but I don't want to speak for you. I know we talked about this last week.
Yeah, I think I was more worried about. I think the way you phrased it was, who are you more worried about in terms of making the tournament? I was more worried about Florida Atlantic. I didn't think either of them will be close to the bubble. Now, in the bracketology I did last week, I think Florida Atlantic was a 6, Gonzaga was a 9. The reason I was more worried about Florida Atlantic is they have more opportunities to lose games because Gonzaga has, in their conference, especially this year, it's weaker. But a lot of years it might be weaker than what Florida Atlantic's going to have to go up against. So if Gonzaga loses a game to St. Mary's, it may not be the end-all, be-all. If Gonzaga wins, a lot of their games, which they should win, it's going to be huge. So Florida Atlantic, for me, it's really just about the conference they're in the American. It's still a solid conference, even with all the teams that left. I don't know how solid it's going to be or how well it's going to hold up. But I think there's a chance that they lose 2 more games in conference before they play Memphis. I don't know who that would be, but just with the way they have, there's a lot of teams that are ranked right around 100 in the net, and when you're playing on the road, and it seems like this team doesn't have the focus they had last year, yeah, I'd say if you lose 2 other games, then to lose 2 more to Memphis, you're squarely on the bubble. You may not get in, and Greg, like I mentioned to you, I think last week, I think it's not like the committee's not going to say, they beat Arizona. They're going to look at the resume and say it's a quad 1 win. It's not like college football where it's like, well, Texas beat Alabama this year, so we got to put Texas above Alabama in the rankings when we have the tournament. I don't think they do that. I think it really is just like, they have a quad 1 win. That's really cool, but like they have this many quad 1 losses, and that's why I'm more concerned about them. I would say they probably have moved down to probably a 7 or 8. Gonzaga's probably around an 8 or so at this point, and yeah, I'd say if a couple more losses, I am concerned about them. It's not the good scheduling can only go so far if you're going to lose these games to quad 4 and quad 2 teams.
It's kind of wild because if you're sitting there on the one line and you're like, wait a minute, we got Gonzaga. We're playing Gonzaga or Like let's just imagine a world where they end up in the 8-9 matchup. It's Gonzaga and FAU. I'd be so mad if I was the one seed. But like, you're right, Joe. That's where these teams are right now. And I mean, that's where FAU was last year. They were literally in the 8-9 game against Memphis. Made it all the way to the Final Four. Had a few things break their way, and I think we do have a tendency to just kind of say, all right, you're bringing everybody back. Maybe you'll see a little bit of growth, or you'll at least be where you were. But it's hard, man. Year to year, things are different. Again, we're still dealing with college kids. These are not professionals. They're going to have some inconsistencies, and I think we're kind of seeing that. So we'll just have to keep an eye on them and see where they go. But that Memphis game, or those Memphis games, are going to be key for them. I would think they probably don't lose both of those. That's all I'm going to say. And of course the narrative changes as they lose a couple of games here or there, but just to bolster their resume, they're going to want to win at least one of those two games.
I would think that would have to be the case. It would be just interesting to see a team that only lost 3 games heading into the tournament that made the championship game last year not make it. I think it's unfortunate, too, because I think Dusty May went from being a guy who could have taken a couple other jobs to now, like, that, the Louisville job's open. He's a guy who has Indiana ties, so at least it's kind of close. Like, maybe he could be a fit there, but now it might look like a one-season wonder if they don't get things together, and I don't think that's necessarily fair, but that's what it will be seen as. So we'll see how they do. We'll see if they're a 2-bid league, a 1-bid league with Memphis winning it, or we'll see what happens. We talked about Tennessee and Ole Miss in this game, Greg, for Saturday. I don't think either of us expected Tennessee to just dominate from start to finish. We like Tennessee. I think both of us liked them a lot in the preseason, but they killed them.
Yeah, I don't know if there's much else to say about this, but I mean, again, Ole Miss, was one of the few remaining undefeated teams. But when you really start looking, this is another one of those resumes. You really start looking at it with a fine-tooth comb. They got wins over Memphis, UCF, NC State, but this is their first Q1 opportunity, and maybe we're going to find out this is one of those, early non-conference season darlings that, they win all their games they're supposed to, but they get in a good opportunity like this, and man, they laid an egg. That's not a good score. And Tennessee, you and I both think, they're an elite team, Final Four contender, possibly national championship contender, but still, even so, this wasn't even close. You'd hope that, your first opportunity for a big win, and again, just like we talked about already, there's not really any moral victories at this point, but you'd hope you'd at least show that you belong on the same floor, and it didn't even look like that, even for a little bit.
Yeah, I'm not going to overanalyze Ole Miss at this point. We kind of expected Tennessee to be a good team, and Tennessee was a good team, and that's just, you're going to take losses like that when things happen like that. I do think Ole Miss can compete in the SEC, maybe not at the top with Tennessee and Kentucky and Auburn, but just a tough loss. In Tennessee, I think it just gives us more reason to believe in them heading forward. Now, Greg, we had a game that we did not pick to talk about on Saturday as well. We had LSU and Texas A&M. LSU beats Texas A&M. Now, we liked Texas A&M at the start of the year. They've had some issues with injuries. They have some losses they wouldn't like. They're still in the tournament, whatever, but this was a team that we thought could make a run in the tournament, probably could go to a Sweet 16, especially we saw them live against Ohio State. I know LSU is not quite the same team they were at the start of the year. They've had some guys come through. I think Jalen Cook, namely, has not played in too many of the games, but I'd say I'm a little concerned about Texas A&M. I don't know, a little bit.
This game, I think I texted you about it when I saw the score around halftime. They had Tyrese Radford back for this game. Now, I believe it was his first game back, so you never know how healthy a guy is playing with his first game back, but at least on paper, they had a full squad, and this goes as a quad 3 loss. You did mention LSU has Jalen Cook, and he was cleared, I believe, Joe, with that 2-time transfer, but he was a boomerang transfer too, where he was at LSU, and then he went to, I think, Tulane or something, then he came back. Is that correct? I just feel like I'm not looking at anything. I just feel like I remember that off the top of my head that this is his second stint at LSU.
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is not a good loss for Texas A&M, but again, we'll just have to see if maybe Radford is playing, but he's not 100% healthy. We still want to see Texas A&M put together some good wins. They did hang tough with Houston earlier in the year. They have a win over Iowa State that the net loves right now. They beat Ohio State on the road. We went and saw that game. They've got a couple of quad one wins. This is not the best loss for them. It's quad 3 at the moment. I don't know if it'll stay there, if it'll become quad 2. I can't imagine it'll end up being. There's no way in my mind it'll ever be quad 4, but still not the best loss. But we know that this team is still kind of working its way back into being healthy. Sometimes you reintroduce someone into the lineup, things get funky. So I'd say concerned. Yeah, I'm with you on that, but we're not throwing this team out the door and saying, you aren't what, we thought you were in the preseason. It's just maybe we look at, and they do have a game that we're going to be talking about in a little bit coming up. So they're going to have opportunities. The SEC preseason was one of those conferences that we just looked at and like, man, this team could be good. This team could be good. This there was just kind of we weren't sure who to put on what tier and whatnot. And it seems like it is going to be open for the most part, but there are, a couple of teams like Tennessee and Kentucky starting to stick their heads out and say, yeah, but we're better than everybody else. But this Texas A&M team, don't sleep on them, just getting everybody back. I'm with you. Preseason, I was like, I don't know. But now, yes, they take this loss. There's reason to be concerned, but I wouldn't close the book on them.
I'm not either. I think I'm waiting for them to get healthy. I don't, like I said, I don't know if they can push for the top of the SEC anymore, just like I mentioned with Ole Miss. But, I think they're still a good team, and they're a team that, you mentioned, say, Gonzaga getting an 8 or 9 seed, and FAU getting an 8 or 9 seed again, and you wouldn't want to play them. Texas A&M's the same thing. If they lose a couple more games and they get down to a 9 or maybe a 10 seed, you don't want to play them in the second round. They can beat anyone. So, just something to watch out for as we go along, see if they get healthy. Buzz Williams usually is a guy who can get his teams to come together near the end of the year, so we'll see what they do there. And then, Greg, we have some more stuff to talk about. Michigan loses to Penn State, and more just broadly talking about it. They lost to Penn State. It was in Philly. It was a way to have Michigan alumni go to the game, to have Phil Martelli be honored, the former St. Joe's coach. So Phil Martelli actually coached the game for Michigan. Juwan Howard sat this one out, even though he had just come back a couple weeks ago from his heart surgery. But now Michigan's lost a couple in a row, including one to McNeese State, who, is playing well under Will Wade. It's not the greatest situation to be doing that. They have talent on this team. They've played competitively with some teams that maybe we thought would be okay, like St. John's, but they're not very good right now. I think Juwan Howard, for a good start to the job that he had, I don't know. I think it might be kind of close to chopping block time.
Yeah, Joe, I just want to make sure you get a chance to say something that you mentioned to me through text. So the John Harbaugh situation and where he goes or doesn't go, you had mentioned how that might affect, not necessarily directly, but it just might alter the context of the situation in terms of money. So if you just want to speak to that a little bit, you're obviously the college football expert.
Yeah, so if Jim Harbaugh decides to go to a different school, or probably not different school, goes to NFL, doesn't come back to Michigan, they might have more money to pay a buyout for Juwan Howard. They might go get someone to do that. I think a lot of things now, athletic departments are tied up with NIL money and giving it to players. Michigan obviously can support things. If Jim Harbaugh comes back, he's a top 10 paid coach in the sport, and he's going to make more money the more contract negotiations that go on, and that's something you might have to watch. So I think that could play a factor, but I think at the end of the day, that might play a factor in who they hire for the basketball position, because I think either way, Juwan Howard might be fired by the end of this year. So
yeah, just to clarify, I for sure said John Harbaugh. John Harbaugh and the Ravens have nothing to do with this situation.
No,
I'm positive that I said John Harbaugh. He has nothing. I guess there will, maybe he can pull some strings at Michigan if he really wants to get Juwan Howard fired, since his brother's there at the moment. But That was a misspeak by me. Has nothing, as far as we can tell, unless there's some conspiracy theory, has nothing to do with the situation.
No, not at all. But we'll again another team. Like I feel like we're keeping tabs on everyone here, but like we are going to keep tabs on Michigan, even if they're not very good, because there is a hot seat thing going on. And then Michigan State, Greg, you had on the outline here to talk about them. We had mentioned before how we're not impressed with Michigan State and their resume. They really don't have that many good wins. They beat Baylor, and that's pretty much it. They go lose to Northwestern, and then this week they go play Illinois. I know I mentioned that to you over text, and it's just especially now, like everyone was mad that James Madison was ranked. Well, James Madison at least beat Michigan State. Michigan State, like they beat Baylor. Is that good enough to put them back in its rankings when they really haven't beat anyone else of note? Some people in the media think yes. Greg, we thought no, and then we were proven right because Northwestern beat them on Sunday night. And it really wasn't a game where I think Michigan State played well, and now they have a tough Big Ten schedule coming up on top of this with Illinois. So it's, I don't know about you, but I think Michigan State has a lot more to prove before they can even come close to the rankings.
Yeah, Joe, you've even mentioned on past pods that we've talked that Baylor is an interesting case too. That Baylor win, yes, it looks good on paper. Baylor's currently sitting at 15th in the net. Looks great, but Baylor is not like, an elite team. They're probably going to take some hits in the Big 12. Maybe they'll be a top. They may end up being a top 3, top 4, top 5 team in the Big 12. But I mean, that is what these people out on this picket line, for rank Michigan State. I don't get it, man. This is another net, sitting at 28th in the net, and they basically lost. Outside of Baylor, they've lost every other quad one opportunity. Their other best win outside of Baylor is Indiana State. I promise you, I don't have anything in front of me, but I bet you if we looked, we could probably find a mid-major somewhere, one of the mid-majors that picked off a power conference team in the non-conference, and that's the only thing that they're standing on other than their Q3 and Q4 wins. And no one wants to talk about ranking. I don't have a case study for you, but I guarantee you we could find one. I don't get it, man. I don't get this team they're like 10-5 or whatever. And they're what is their record right now? They're 9-6 they would have been before the Northwestern game. They would have been 9-5. I just don't get whatever. Like we know the talent is there, and there's still that voice in your head. I think if anyone other than Izzo, maybe you could name a couple other coaches. If it was anyone other than a Hall of Fame coach coaching this team, and we didn't really know what the roster talent was, we'd be like, what are you talking about? But we give them the benefit of the doubt. So I guess this is a team to pay attention to. Still, I don't get wanting to rank them. I think there are many more deserving teams. Not that means anything. Not that being ranked is, nobody gets paid based off of it. But, exposure and whatnot. I mean, it's what makes these people tune into games. So you and I are on the same page with this one. They shouldn't be ranked. I don't know why certain media pundits are storming in saying they should be ranked. And I think even one said I think Seth Davis said they were going to be on his ballot. Maybe I'm confusing that with someone else, but I just don't get it.
Yeah, one of the wins that they were really impressed by was like Penn State, where Penn State is a long way away from being, I think, what they could be under Mike Rhodes and everything. It's a first year, a lot of moving parts had to be put into place. So I don't know. I think a lot of times you want to see these big programs be good. It's good for the sport when the blue bloods are good, but and I guess personal relationships come into it as well. But let's be honest, if Michigan State goes out and beats Illinois Thursday, yeah, maybe they should be ranked, even though they lost to Northwestern. I don't know. Maybe that should be it. But even then, they're like you said, they're 10-6. Is that good enough with only 2 good wins at that point? I don't know. I think there's a lot of deserving teams out there. All right, Greg, you had some teams that you wanted to mention before we get to our picks for the week, so I'm going to let you take it away and mention the 3 teams you want to talk about.
Yeah, Joe. So what I'll do here is I'll just kind of give you my thoughts on each of these 3 teams, and then if there's some one or more of them that you want to give an additional input on, you can absolutely do that. But South Carolina is the first team I have listed here. I did watch their game against Mississippi State. Those are two teams that I believe only had either one or two losses going into that game. South Carolina is currently 13-1. I don't have Mississippi State's record in front of me, but I was actually impressed with Mississippi State defense. I checked this afternoon. They're currently sitting at 10th in defensive efficiency in KenPom. That defense, that Mississippi State defense is that they're going to like, I'm looking ahead. I don't know if they're playing Tennessee this week or next week. I know they looked ahead, but seeing that Mississippi State defense go up against the Tennessee offense, that's one I think we're going to have to pick because, again, I don't think it was this week. That's why it's not on our picks, but I did enjoy watching this game. It was a really gritty game. We got to see Michi he had a couple of good plays. They don't really have a signature win yet, but I mean, South Carolina is sitting at 13-1. Their only loss is that away game to Clemson. So this is just a team, and I'm talking about South Carolina and Mississippi State, two teams to kind of pay attention to. I don't think they're going to compete for the SEC, but I think they can make some noise. I think they're teams that might get overlooked, and we could all of a sudden see, Kentucky or Tennessee or Texas A&M take a loss that you would maybe think they shouldn't to them. So just a team to look for in the SEC. Next is Oregon. So there's another team that is stringing some good wins together. They've got a loss to Bama earlier in the year. They've got a loss to Syracuse. They had a loss to Santa Clara, but they're still sitting at 12-3. They beat Washington and Washington State this week. Georgia only has I think one or two losses, and Oregon was one of the teams that beat them. Oregon's already beat USC. They're 4-0 in the Pac-12. Sitting at 51 in the net. Just a team that, I feel like we've kind of written off Oregon the last, 2 or 3 years, and they're like, all right, maybe they'll be a 10 or an 11 seed. Maybe they'll make the tournament, but maybe Dana Altman's going to have a little bit of a resurgence. Again, not a team that I'm just saying put them in the tournament, but hey, there might be a game on a Thursday night worth watching. The last team, Utah State, we kind of already touched on the strength of the Mountain West. Joe is still not a believer. We're going to make him pay for that. So their only loss at the moment is to Bradley. They got a good win this weekend over Colorado State, who's kind of the darling of the Mountain West outside of San Diego State at the moment. They did beat San Francisco as well, who's kind of the only other notable team in the WCC. So the reason you really want to talk about this team, I believe they're 14-1 overall. They're 12-1 against Division I, but they turned over their entire roster. There's not a single point scored from last year that returned. I mean, I know it's becoming more of the norm, to see more of this roster turnover and whatnot. But that to me is an outlier, even for what we're used to seeing. That to me that feels like, even an outlier of outliers. So Danny Sprinkle is a first-year coach out there, so good for him. Came over from Montana State. Mountain West looks to be, I'm gonna still stick with. I think they're getting at least 3 in. We'll make Joe a believer eventually. So Joe, I just kind of rapid fired through those. You got any thoughts on any of those teams? Again, these are not teams that I'm saying throw them in the tournament, but just hey, if you turn on the TV on Thursday night and Oregon's playing Utah, that's a game you want to turn on, or Utah State's playing Colorado State, which they already did, or South Carolina's playing Tennessee. Those are games you probably want to keep on, just for fun.
Yeah, all I'll say is I think Utah State is the most impressive of those teams. I don't think any of them have done anything to warrant tournament talk. I think Oregon would probably be closest. I mean, it's nice to have a nice record, but it feels like there's a lot of teams who have good records this year but don't have much of a resume built up because of it. They've maybe scheduled lightly and stuff. But yeah, Utah State, I think the job Sprinkle's done in year one has been good. They only have 2 quad 1 wins, which I think obviously one came against Colorado State, so they haven't had too many opportunities. Let's see if they hold up down the stretch. And for Oregon and South Carolina, I mean, some decent wins here or there, but I'm not sold on them yet. So I think to be to take the next step, I think they have to win some games and prove it to us. All right, so let's go to our picks for the week. We'll start on Tuesday, January 9th. We have Houston at Iowa State, Greg.
Yeah, so this is actually a really interesting game. Iowa State sitting at 11-3. They're actually 12th in the net. Houston sitting at 1 in the net. This is a pretty big game. Iowa State doesn't have a lot to their name, but they did what Joe says you should. They beat up on those Q4 teams, so they've got a really high net score. But this might be one of those things where we might just end up picking Houston games until they lose. Just, hey, it's just going to be interesting to see how far can they go. I'm picking Houston. Iowa State, another one of those teams that maybe, like you said, they've got a nice record, but haven't really done anything as of yet. Actually, I believe more than half of their games are Q4 games. They've lost Oklahoma and Texas A&M. Their only Q1 opportunities, lost both of those. So TJ Osselberger does a good job bringing in transfers every year. It feels like they rebuild that team from year to year, but I don't think they get this one done. I think Houston State's undefeated.
Yeah, I'm not really big on Iowa State either, so I'll just go ahead and say Houston's, I think, much better. I think they've prepared pretty well for this with some of their non-conference scheduling. Obviously, playing a game like at Xavier, which is not the greatest team, but like on the road, they've kind of built this up. I think they will get tripped up here soon, Greg, but I don't think it'll be at Iowa State. I know the Hilton Magic thing is something that was big for a short stretch, but overrated, Greg. I'm going to say it. Hilton Magic's overrated, so I'm going Houston. Moving on, we have BYU and Baylor. This one is on Tuesday, January 9th as well, 9 p.m. Eastern. It's at Baylor. Baylor has a new arena, Greg. I don't know if you've seen the pictures of it.
Yeah, so everything I've heard about this arena is it's smaller, more intimate. It seems like they downsized a little bit, and it seems like that's kind of what a lot of schools that are opening new arenas, they kind of go for that, so that it's always packed and the fans are. I mean, you think about the ones that you can remember. I mean, you think about Cameron Indoor, you think about Bud Walton, you think about arenas like that. I think they're trying to give it that intimate feel. So BYU, Baylor, two different stories here. BYU, that team that no one thought anything of. This is a rank versus rank matchup. Baylor at 14, BYU at 18. Baylor's had those issues this year where we're like, maybe they aren't, this or that or whatever. I'm taking Baylor in this game. But BYU has a chance to, kind of prove, hey, you go get this win at Baylor. They have a chance to prove, forget what you thought about us in the preseason. We belong.
Yeah, you're right. I think that actually is really important because after losing to Cincinnati, a game they probably should have won. Big 12 schedule's just starting. If you can put a win on your resume right away after getting that loss, I think it really helps. And it's on the road, which will be tough too. I think the biggest problem I have with the new arena, Greg, is the camera angle is so bad. I don't know if you watched the game yet. I watched a little bit. I forget what team they were playing last week, but it's so high up. Like, you can see everything, and it's kind of cool from, like, being able to see everything type of thing. It's just so abnormal. But other than that, no, it's a very nice arena. I'd imagine it's lower in seating as well, just because it's a private school and everything, too. So, I don't know. I'll take Baylor in this game overall. I think the defense is maybe taking a step back over the last couple of years. They do have some good offensive players. And, for as much as we've watched non-conference basketball, Greg, if there's a gun to your head, do you know if BYU is good or not yet? Like, I still don't know.
Nope. This is the same. I think I've grouped them in Oklahoma, which both happen to be Big 12 teams, where I'm just like, I think I even asked you on our previous pod. I think I gave you three teams. I can't remember who the third team was. I think I was like BYU, Oklahoma, or someone else. Like, who are you picking to be, the most consistent going out? We'll just have to see with BYU. As Joe mentioned at the end of the last podcast, I did pick UC. Maybe it's a little bit of that bias that, I've just seen UC play a couple of times this year, both in person against Dayton and then in the crosstown shootout on TV against Xavier. Like a little bit of what they got going on there, but still, that's a game that BYU probably needs to win, even though it's on the road. If they want to say, hey, we're as you're ranked right now, a top 15 team, pretty high up in the net. I don't have their net ranking in front of me, but it's just going to be an interesting game because the storyline's going to be interesting coming out of it either way, because if Baylor wins, it's well, BYU's a pretender, or especially if it's a wide score, or if BYU wins, we might be throwing around more questions about Baylor than we say we're solidifying what BYU is. So just going to be interesting to talk about next week and see what happens.
BYU is currently 4 in the net still, so still a lot to play for and trying to keep that ranking and help their tournament resume. Texas A&M and Auburn is also Tuesday. As we're recording this right now, Greg, the issues with Texas A&M are still there, but Auburn is actually the second favorite to win the SEC this year.
Yeah, I was really high on them in the preseason. Just they have a lot of nice pieces on that team. I'm picking Auburn in this one. I think if you'd have given me this in the preseason, this would have been a really tough game to pick. This is on our schedule because this is just one of those we're teetering with Texas A&M, and I think Auburn is on the rise. So this is going to be, I think, a good game. That Auburn defense is stifling. They're another one of those teams that plays really good defense. I know they gave up a lot of points to Baylor, but I still, man, there was just times in that game early in the season where I was like, I don't know how anybody's going to score on them. I'm picking Auburn. This is just another one of those games that I'm both interested to see what the result is from a storyline and from a gameplay standpoint.
Yeah, I'm going Auburn as well. I was really high Texas A&M this preseason and Wade Taylor. I think we have to take things as they are, right? Like some of these teams we mentioned, we don't know who they are. At this point, we're assuming Texas A&M is a good team, just not fully put together yet with injuries or whatever. They'll probably find their way, but I don't think it's going to be at Auburn when they figure this out, which Auburn's crowds are pretty raucous these last couple of years. Watch out for Holloway and Broome to have big games in this one. I think Auburn wins. Wednesday, we have a little bit of a rivalry game. We have North Carolina at NC State. This one's at 8 p.m. Eastern at NC State.
Yeah, this one, again, probably another one of those games that really we got it. I got it on our list because it's an in-state rivalry game. You always pay attention to these games. Sometimes you get a weird result that you're like, okay, well, that only happened because, this is a rivalry game. NC State currently sitting at 66th in the net. They do have an inflated record. Another one of those teams we kind of talked about. They've played like 8 or 9 Q4 games, and then they've lost to BYU, Tennessee, Ole Miss. So, if this wasn't literally North Carolina against NC State, probably wouldn't pick it. But just for that little spark of in interconference and in-state rivalry game, I got it on our list. I'm picking Carolina. I don't think there's any reason to pick NC State, but you say that out loud, and then we come back next Monday or Tuesday and we talk, and it's, well, gee, Joe, how did NC State figure out a way to beat their rival?
Yeah, I'm going UNC big. I will be bold enough to say if North Carolina State pulls the upset, Greg will get a tattoo of a tar hole on his forehead. I don't think NC State's very good. My favorite player is DJ Burns. And maybe the whole country, just a big guy who can kind of do a little bit dribbling and passing, but I think UNC is a much better team, so I will take them. Next one up, the last game we're going to pick is Oklahoma and Kansas. This is at Kansas. Greg, you mentioned it. Oklahoma still having trouble figuring them out. Kansas has some issues, but at least they've kind of won some big games.
Picking Kansas, another one of those teams that until Oklahoma wins a big game, and tells me that they're worth paying attention to, and I mean a big game. This would be by far, this would be their best win, I believe. I can't remember exactly what the net for Kansas is, but they do have that Providence win, and that's going to be one to note because. First of all, some idiot on this podcast said that Providence beat Oklahoma, and that wasn't right. So we're making sure, again, just to straighten that out. I said that was wrong. Oklahoma beat Providence. But that's unfortunately for them, that's a win it's going to lose steam, as we already talked about on this pod, just with what's going on with Providence. But again, I know you kind of talked about how the committee is going to be like, well, that's a Q1, that's a Q2. When we talk about these things, we can say, okay, we know what that was when it happened, talking about this team and just what we actually think. But here's your chance. It's at Kansas. We just saw TCU get arguably screwed over. You win this game, and all of a sudden the entire narrative of your team changes. So I'm picking Kansas, but I think if you made me on the spot say who do I think has a better chance of winning their game this week, BYU or Oklahoma, obviously not their only game, but their big game. It's Oklahoma for me. I feel a little bit better about Oklahoma against Kansas than BYU and Baylor. Maybe you disagree, but I'm taking Kansas.
I'm taking Kansas as well, not Texas. Wow. I think having Kevin McCullar helps. He's I think been able to step up in a way that they needed with some of the players they lost the last couple of years. Hunter Dickinson's obviously been good inside, but he has his issues too. And I need to see more out of Oklahoma before I can take them. It's not a team that we've seen a ton of. The win against Providence was very nice, but a lot has changed since then. I think this will be a good chance for them to prove it. This is a good game to check out, Greg, before the NFL playoffs. This is at 2 p.m. on Saturday. NFL playoffs don't start till like 4:30 Eastern on Saturday, so it's kind of nice that the TV schedule. You can watch some of the noon games on Saturday. Watch this big 2 p.m. game with two ranked teams, then go straight into the NFL schedule, and then into your night, whatever you're doing. So both of us got Kansas there. Greg, any final thoughts for the week?
Yeah, two things. I just happened to pull this up because I was going to make a point about. I did go to the UD game this weekend. They played UMass. They were up big for a while, and then all of a sudden, Frank Martin starts screaming bloody murder, and they're back in the game. Darn near gave that up. So I'm looking at the net conference rankings right now, and this is actually surprising to me. I knew the A10 was going to be pretty low on here. So I think we know the power conferences, Big 12, SEC, Big 10, Big East. We knew those were going to be on top. Currently sitting at 7th is the Mountain West. I think we kind of already talked about that. 8th is the A10. And Joe, here's why I'm going to point this out. It's because I'm looking at that league right now probably as a 1-bid league. I think the only way that that's a 2-bid league is if Dayton pretty much runs the regular season and then makes it so that there's no way to not give them an at-large, but then they don't win the conference tournament. Even then, I'd say just with how weak the A10 is this year, I wouldn't advise losing the conference tournament. We'll have to see about that. But so I'll give you your top 8. You got this is net conference rankings: Big 12, SEC, Big 10, Big East, ACC, Pac-12, Mountain West, A10. That's in order. You want to try and give me 9 and 10? And there's a conference in there that I haven't mentioned yet that we've talked about a lot today. That I'm wondering if you're going to know where they might be, because this is actually staggering to me.
WCC.
WCC currently sits at 12.
Ooh, they got
not good either. But just wait until you hear what 9 and 10 are. Not necessarily. I'll tell you, 9 is okay. Missouri Valley is 9. So you know who that means is 10 that we've talked about that has arguably a contender is the American Athletic, currently sitting at 10th in the net conference rankings. And that's not good for a team like FAU that we've said, hey, you don't want to take some losses in conference. I did not. If you would have gun to my head, said, hey, rank the conferences, and I'm sure it might be different for, RPI conference rankings, whatever, but the American Athletic being that low, I would have never guessed, because I already have a pretty low view of the A10 this year. And you're telling me the American Athletic, at least at the moment, is 2 slots down. I don't even know who's good out in the Missouri Valley outside of Indiana State. Yikes, man. That's not a good look for the American. I know they lost a lot of teams in the Big 12, but yikes.
Yeah, the net regular rankings are tough enough to figure out. The conference rankings, I have no idea. I know the A10 has 2 teams in the top 50 with Dayton and St. Joe's. Thinking West Coast has 3 teams in the top 50. Maybe they'd be ranked high. No, that's not it. So it's kind of a weird time. You're right. I think the A10 is a 1-bid league unless St. Joe's or someone else knocks off Dayton in the conference tournament. And even then, it might still be a 1-bid league, and I think that's probably the case with everyone below them too. I mean, it's not a fun year. I mean, if St. Mary's was better, maybe, but even then, if Gonzaga runs the rest of the table, they're probably still on the bubble if they lose to St. Mary's in the conference tournament. So it's one of those things you just never want to be too sure of yourself. So my final thought, Greg, Gonzaga is actually the base of it. They have a very important game. Gonzaga's been a very big topic on this podcast. It makes sense because they've been such a good team over the last several years. They've made 1 seeds, Final Fours. This team, we mentioned them with their depth issues. We mentioned their resume issues. They don't have a quad 1 win, and they are 50 something in the net right now. Or excuse me, 45 in the net right now. They play at Santa Clara this week, so it's worth watching if you're able to. If they lose that game, Santa Clara is the 4th best team in the WCC. Their net ranking is around 103. So San Francisco's good, ranked 46th in the net. St. Mary's is 50th in the net. There's chances for good wins. But if you lose this game, or even if you're able to add this to your resume as a road game, it really helps things out for Gonzaga's case here. So I'm going to point it out because it is worth noting that, hey, if they don't make the tournament, that'd be the first time in a long time. If they don't get some of these wins against Santa Clara, San Francisco, and St. Mary's, it's going to be really dicey. And as you said, Greg, if they do stumble in this, and you say they move from an 8 or 9 down to a 10 or 11, who wants to play Gonzaga in the first round? If you're a 6 seed, I don't think that's like the worst case scenario, because if they are healthy, you're screwed. All right, so that was my final thought. My turn to remind everyone to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast, and on YouTube, it helps us out as we move along. We'll be back next week to recap this week and pick the next week of games as we move forward with the college basketball season. For now, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time.